The weasel slipped out from beneath the collapsed wooden fence just as the last orange strokes of dusk began to fade. Her narrow body moved low to the ground, weaving between overgrown roots and forgotten rows of fruit trees whose branches sagged under the weight of unharvested seasons. She expected the orchard to greet her with its usual nighttime whisper, the soft rustle of leaves turning in the cooling wind, the creak of dry branches shifting as the first darkness settled. But tonight, the orchard held itself unnaturally still. No breeze brushed her whiskers. No leaves trembled above her. Not a single twig shifted. She paused immediately, instincts tightening like a pulled thread. Stillness could mean a predator, but this was different. Predators made silence. They did not freeze the world. She lifted her head. The orchard was abandoned years ago, but life still moved within it. Insects, mice, birds that roosted in the hollows. Yet tonight she sensed them in a suspended state, as if the entire orchard waited for a signal that never arrived. The weasel crept forward, her paws nearly soundless on the compacted soil. She passed beneath an apple tree whose branches hung motionless, though the fruits remaining on it were shriveled and soft, ready to drop. She nudged one lightly with her nose. It swayed, but only from her touch. No wind caught it, no breeze continued the motion. It simply returned to stillness, as though the air itself resisted movement. She moved deeper between the rows. Dry leaves coated the ground. Normally, even a faint wind sent them drifting in soft, brittle waves. Tonight, not one leaf shifted. They sat layered and flat, as if pressed down by invisible hands. When she stepped across them, they barely crackled. She sniffed the air again. Nothing moved. Scents hung heavy and stagnant, as though trapped in place. She could smell mice clearly, too clearly, because nothing dispersed their scent. She knew exactly where they hid, but instinct told her something was wrong. Prey never smelled so strong unless the world around them failed to carry the odours away. A mouse peeked from a hollow in a rotting log. Instead of darting out in sharp bursts, it only leaned forward slightly, whiskers twitching. It waited, expecting the wind to carry danger or safety. But the air told it nothing. It turned head left, then right, confused by the overwhelming stillness. The weasel crouched, ready to pounce, but she hesitated. Even she felt disoriented. Every animal in the orchard relied on wind. Predators hunted with it, prey hid with it, trees breathed with it. Without it, everything was exposed and blind at once. A sudden metallic clatter echoed from beyond the old barn wall. The weasel froze. Then she smelled humans. 3 figures approached along the overgrown dirt path, carrying strange boxes and long metal tubes. Their footsteps were muffled, not by silence, but by air so dense and unmoving that sound seemed to fall straight to the ground. One human stopped beside a pear tree and lifted an anemometer. Its tiny blades did not move. 0 again, he muttered. Not even microcurrents? Asked a woman behind him. He shook his head. Not a breath. It's like the air has weight, but no direction. Another human took a temperature reading. Surface cooling is normal, but the atmosphere's stagnant. There's no convection at all. The woman knelt, brushing her hand over a pile of leaves. Look at this. They should be shifting. Even insects walking would disturb them. The weasel watched closely from beneath a thorny bush. Humans rarely came here, and when they did, the orchard always answered with its shifting sounds. Leaves turning, branches swaying, the wind sliding through dead fruit. Tonight, the orchard offered them nothing. The weasel moved again, deeper into the abandoned rows. She passed under an apricot tree whose branches sagged dangerously low. A few dried apricots clung stubbornly to stems. She brushed past them, but the branches didn't sway. They were suspended in still air as though frozen in time. A crow perched on a broken wooden post cawed once, startled by the humans. The sound echoed strangely, heavy, truncated. Normally wind stretched sounds through the orchard, giving them space. Tonight, the core travelled only a short distance before dissolving, cut down by unmoving air. The crow shifted its wings, expecting balance from the breeze. Instead, it nearly lost its footing, surprised by nothing pushing back against it. It leapt into the air, flapped hard, then veered awkwardly, nearly colliding with a branch. Birds were never clumsy, but without wind currents, even flight became unpredictable. The weasel crawled along the base of a half-fallen wall. The stones radiated leftover heat from the day, slow and steady, but without wind to carry the warmth away. The air remained thick and warm even at nightfall. The orchard was suffocating under its own trapped temperature. She reached the center clearing, a place where the wind once gathered speed between rows of trees. Here, fragrant breezes used to sweep fallen petals into swirling spirals. She paused, expecting some instinctual comfort. But the clearing was dead. Not quiet. Lifeless. A fox lay stretched in the shadows, panting lightly. The weasel recognized its scent immediately, though she should not have smelled it from this distance. Scent should fade with distance. Instead, it lingered like a thick fog. The fox looked up, too exhausted or confused to chase her. Its ears flicked toward distant rustles, but the rustles didn't travel naturally. Sound arrived too close, too suddenly. Even the fox looked disoriented. One of the humans walked into the clearing. He held a smoke wand, something meant to visualize airflow. He pressed a button. A thin stream of pale smoke drifted into the air. The weasel watched. The smoke rose a few centimeters and stopped. Suspended, hanging over the wand like a frozen ghost. The humans murmured. Airflow is non-existent. But why? Temperature gradient is there. Something's suppressing movement. The weasel didn't understand their words, but she understood the orchard itself was broken. She moved toward the far edge where blackberry bushes grew wild. The berries were shriveled, untouched by wind or insects. A few bees lay still beneath them, wings partially open, caught in exhaustion. They couldn't regulate temperature without airflow. Even their bodies needed wind. The weasel sniffed one. It twitched weakly. She backed away, uneasy. A low rumble passed through the ground. A tree branch cracked somewhere in the northern rows, but the sound travelled strangely. It didn't ripple outward. It hit her ears bluntly, as though the orchard swallowed its own echo. She turned and saw a walnut tree drop a branch. Slowly, with no wind to push it. It simply fell from decay, landing in a soft cloud of dust. Dust that sank straight down instead of drifting. Without wind, even dust did not dance. Night deepened. The sky darkened. The orchard remained still. The weasel felt tension coil inside her tiny frame. She depended on motion, rustling clues, scent carried by breeze, shifting branches that hinted at danger. Without them, she was blind. Everything smelled too strong. Everything sounded too close. Everything stood too still. If the wind did not return tomorrow, or the next night, or the next turn of the season, insects would overheat and die, birds would struggle to fly straight, trees would fail to pollinate, scent trails would stagnate, predators would lose their hunting signals, prey would lose warning cues, and the orchard, once alive with moving air, would collapse under suffocating stillness. And the weasel, nimble dancer of rustling underbrush, would wander a world where leaves no longer spoke, the air no longer carried stories, and the earth's breath fell silent. The night sank deeper over the abandoned orchard, but nothing changed. The air did not cool. The leaves did not rustle. The faint silver sheen of moonlight lay across the unmoving canopy like a sheet of frostless glass. The weasel, crouched beneath a thicket of dry brambles, watched as the orchard struggled under its own stagnant air. She lifted her head again, testing for any hint of breeze, a tremor, a twitch, a soft drift that could mean safety or danger. But the air remained heavy, unmoving, as though the world had wrapped itself in a thick blanket of silence. Her whiskers didn't quiver, her fur didn't flutter. Even her breath seemed too loud in this unnatural stillness. She slunk out into the open, belly close to the earth. The ground radiated the warmth still trapped from the day. Normally, night winds pulled that warmth upward, dispersing it into the cooling sky. Tonight the heat hugged the orchard floor, clinging to the soil as though pinned there. She passed a patch of dried leaves piled along the roots of a peach tree. Usually these leaves skittered with the movement of beetles and crickets hiding beneath. Now even the insects seemed subdued. A cricket lay on its side, twitching lightly, wings spread. Overheated, it had no wind to help cool its body. The weasel nudged it. It did not right itself. She moved on, unease growing. Nearby, an owl perched silently on the broken beam of the old barn. Its feathers were puffed, its eyes wide and unblinking. Owls relied on soft wind currents to glide silently between trees. Tonight, when it tried to take off, it flapped too hard, startling itself with the effort. It made a clumsy, noisy launch, and nearly crashed into a motionless branch before correcting its path. It circled once, wings beating without the graceful lift wind normally offered, then returned to the barn, frustrated. Predators weren't meant to fly in dead air. The weasel continued toward the heart of the orchard, wary of the owl but sensing it was too confused to hunt effectively. The deeper she went, the stranger things became. The blackberry thickets sagged, leaves limp and slightly curled. Without wind, they transpired moisture poorly. Heat built between branches. A faint sweet rot clung in the air, fruit spoiling too early, warm air suffocating the branches. She smelled fox, mice, birds, insects, all too strongly. The orchard had become a bowl collecting the scent of every creature within it, nothing dispersing, nothing escaping. Scent that concentrated like this confused even her sharp senses. She could smell everything, but locate nothing precisely. Trails overlapped, stagnated, twisted in place. She tried to follow the scent of a vole, but the trail stood still, layered thickly in the air instead of flowing along the ground. No direction, no age, just odour suspended like humidity. Farther ahead, she saw the fox again, lying under a fig tree. Its chest rose and fell rapidly. Heat built beneath the still canopy, exhausting animals used to airflow. Flies gathered around its ears, but even the flies felt sluggish. When the fox lifted its head and looked at her with dull eyes, it didn't bother to move. Even predators were losing instinctive cues. A distant cracking sound echoed overhead. A branch somewhere in the orchard snapped, brittle from lack of moisture movement within the tree. Leaves that should have responded by shivering in shock simply fell motionlessly, drifting straight down. The orchard was suffocating from the canopy down. The weasel slipped between rows of plum trees. A few plums hung overripe, skins blistered from heat with no cooling air to heal them. A wasp crawled across one fruit, moving slowly, its wings open but motionless. Even insects that thrived in hot climates needed wind to breathe properly. She passed the barn again and noticed new movement. The humans emerged from behind the dilapidated structure. They carried larger equipment now, tripods, instruments with thin rods pointing upward like metal insect antennae. The woman spoke first. No airflow in the canopy layer, mid-level, or ground layer. It's all static. The man with the meter frowned deeply. Humidity is starting to climb without wind circulation. If this continues, fungal bloom will explode. A third shook his head. This orchard hasn't had proper air movement all week. But tonight, it's total stagnation. The woman lifted an anemometer again. The blades didn't twitch. This is the longest zero read we've recorded. The weasel watched from behind a stump as they placed sensors into the soil. One human squatted and brushed aside leaves. "Look at this," he murmured. "Spores forming early. The ecosystem's collapsing." The weasel didn't understand their words, but she understood collapse. She felt it under her paws, within her whiskers, in the way every living thing moved wrong. She continued deeper, past the orchard's boundary fence where wild grasses grew tall. The grasses stood stiff and straight, unmoved by any breeze. Dew did not form on their tips. Without wind to carry moisture upward and cool the blades, dew remained absent. The grasses shimmered faintly in moonlight, dry, brittle, and warm. A hare crouched there, ears twitching anxiously, but its ears, designed to capture wind and vibration, had nothing to work with. They rotated uselessly, picking up only close sounds that arrived too suddenly. When the weasel stepped on a brittle twig, the hare jumped violently at the unexpected sharpness, then bolted in a zigzag, confused not by her, but by silence. The weasel paused. The silence was the worst part. Silence in a windless world wasn't ordinary quiet. It was thick, heavy, oppressive, a quiet that didn't allow echoes, didn't carry chirps, didn't let trees speak. She padded toward the far edge of the orchard, where old irrigation channels formed shallow ditches. The water inside them usually reflected moonlight in trembling ripples. Tonight the surface was so still it looked solid, not even a moth disturbing its reflection. She leaned in and touched the surface lightly with her paw. It quivered, but only where she touched. The movement faded immediately instead of spreading outward. The stillness was absolute. She turned back toward the orchard's center, trying to understand whether this was predator silence or something larger. She passed beneath a walnut tree just as a new sound rose, a soft moan of wood under strain. The tree's crown sagged, leaves curling inward, not from cold, but from trapped heat that could not dissipate. She watched as the tree dropped a cluster of walnuts. They hit the ground with dull thuds, louder than they should have been, because no wind cushioned their fall. The orchard felt old, tired, suffocating under its own unmoving air. If the wind did not return tomorrow, or the next night, or the next season, leaves would rot on branches, trees would fail to breathe, insects would overheat, birds would lose flight patterns, predators would lose hunting cues, prey would flee without direction, and the orchard, abandoned by humans but alive for decades, would fall into irreversible decay. And the weasel, little shadow of the underbrush, would wander a world where the air no longer moved, where danger had no scent, and where every step felt like walking through the breathless heart of a dying grove.